Nesta like manages to quickly get the mask off of her face because she's not 100% in control right now. Cassian picks her up because she is shaking and gonna collapse. It's so cool. It's oh, Nesta. Cassian and Azriel end up delivering the two Autumn Court soldiers that are left alive after all the fighting to the Court of Nightmares. The Inner Circle all kind of examine them and realize that these two men, they are obviously under some kind of enchantment, as were the whole troop. That's why they attacked Azriel and Cass. They think that this must be some kind of spell, either being done by Brialyn or by Koshi. So they suggest getting in touch with Helion, who is High Lord of the Dawn Court. One of his many talents is being able to break enchantments and spells and heal people. He is also Lucian's father. Let's not forget that. When they get home, Nesta is in the heavily warded room with the mask itself. And she's just found herself there, like the mask is beckoning to her and calling to her to be used. Now, Nesta shows everybody her memory of what happened under the water, and Rhys and Amryn discuss the fact that the Kelpie was talking an ancient language. It's not been spoken for about 15,000 years, under the water. They talk about like the nature of Kelpies and how cruel they are, and how the one Nesta's killed very well may be the last Kelpie left alive in Prithian, except not alive anymore. And while Nesta's bathing, Cassian takes some food to her, and we get another very, very iconic spicy scene. But life continues on. And so back at training, we have two new priestesses join in the group, Ilana and Lorelei. And Gwen tells Nesta about a practice she's been reading about in the library called mind stilling, a technique originated by a female warrior group from years and years and years ago called the Valkyrie, who no longer exist. And she tells everyone it was all about helping steady the mind and emotions of a warrior. It's like meditating. It's the act of sitting still and letting the mind go completely quiet, which everyone's kind of vibing with. They're like, ooh, this sounds quite cool. Nesta and Cassian actually start practicing with swords once Nesta points out the fact that they haven't been using any weapons yet. They've all been doing hand-to-hand combat. And Nesta really enjoys fighting with swords. So she likes the weight of them in her hand. She is a fan of a sword. We see Nesta try the stairs again. She gets like step 6,000 out of 10. So Homegirl is getting fitter and healthier. As the group that's training together gets bigger, Azriel joins them as like a second instructor. And later on, Gwen and Nesta practice mind stilling together. They give it a go before they introduce it to everyone else. And for the very first time, Nesta feels quite settled within herself. This practice of mind stilling, of meditation, of consciousness is incredibly beneficial to her at this point in her life. Now, because she's shown such a high interest in swords, Cassian takes Nesta to a blacksmith to see swords being made. And once she learns how to do it, she wants to make one of her own. Cassian gives Nesta like 15 minutes to spar, and she is full of aggression. And you're finding out that for her, learning to fight wielding a sword, it's how she is dealing with all of the emotions she's got inside. We do, however, see Lucian clock Nesta training and fighting, and he's really, really impressed by it. Shocked, but impressed. And he walks over to them, which is a big deal because Nesta, Lucian, that relationship ain't great because, he kind of facilitated everything bad that's happened to Nesta. Even though it wasn't his fault, my poor baby Lucian. Now, the next day, Helion arrives and he flies in on a Pegasus. I kid you not, a Pegasus. And it's so cool to see actual Pegasi in this book, because if you've read Crescent City, my homegirl Bryce Quinlan is an absolute Pegasus stan. And the fact that they do actually exist in Prithian, it's so good. It's so cool. Helion inspects all of the Autumn Court soldiers and he says, look, their bodies and their minds, they aren't their own, but this isn't a spell. There isn't a spell I can break on them. He says it seems more like there's some kind of fog around their minds. Helion also meets with Nesta because whatever wards are put around the mask to stop anyone getting in and using it, they obviously don't work on Nesta. So, and she is very much tempted and being called to the trove to use it. So he wants to work on making some kind of protection spell around the mask and the rest of the trove when they find it to keep everyone, including Nesta, away. Asriel then heads off to catch Eris up, actually, on everything they have found out, particularly about his soldiers and what's been done to them. We then get another amazing spicy, spicy scene. This book is full of them. It's so good. In the morning, Rhys calls Amren, Cassian, and Asriel to his office. He tells them that the blacksmith Cassian and Nesta visited the other day has basically dumped the 3 weapons Nesta was involved in helping make on Rhys. And this blacksmith is convinced that they are cursed weapons. And they come to the conclusion that these 3 swords are made in the same vein that anything that comes out of the cauldron, like the dead trove, is considered made, because Nesta has taken the ability to create things from the cauldron. She has made 3 new magic weapons. And this is a particularly shady moment because Amren and Rhys do not want to tell Nesta that this has happened and that she is capable of making made objects. And it is Asriel and Cassian who are like, that is unacceptable. What the hell? Why would you keep that from her? So shady. Trust me, I have so many problems with this. I do want to point out that if this exact same discussion had happened only like a few months before, everyone would have just kept this from Nesta because they do not do my homegirl right. As it's a tie, they can't really make a firm decision. So they all go, oh, well, we'll ask Feyre, we'll give her the deciding vote. Although bear in mind, Feyre unknowingly is in the same situation as Nesta, where other people are supposedly in charge of deciding what she does and doesn't get to know about her baby. In the exact same way, they're deciding now whether they should or shouldn't tell Nesta this very important thing about herself. They've literally done the exact same thing to Feyre in regard to the baby. Cassian and Nesta are winnowed over to the Spring Court where they're going to meet with Eris in like neutral territory, and they catch him up about what's happened to all of his soldiers. Halfway through their conversation, they do, however, encounter Tamlin, who is in his beast form. Because, you know, everyone's just kind of using Tamlin's land as like neutral space. None of us own it, and Tamlin's not going to kick off. But he comes in, he's all wild, he's kind of going feral. And in an absolutely iconic moment, Nesta does her iconic finger point to Tamlin and he backs the fuck down so fast. And it turns out it's building up a mythos around Nesta. She did that to the King of Hyben and he died. And now everyone is thinking, if she points at me, I'm gonna die. So the moment she starts raising her hand, people start ducking real quick. And you can imagine Nesta is an absolute Tamlin hater, for sure. It's iconic. It's so good. Whilst all the girls are training together, Cassian and Asriel realize, oh, the girls are kind of getting into the history and the mythos of the Valkyries. And Cassian and Asriel admit that back in the last war, they fought alongside the last iteration of Valkyries. They actually knew these warrior women. And the girls like freak out. Gwen is like, oh my God, that's so cool. Later on that day, Feyre gets to make her decision about whether Nesta should or shouldn't know about the fact that she can make these magical items. And Feyre decides, yeah, you should tell Nesta this important thing. And it's at this point in the book, in this chapter, we find out that alongside reading and now fighting and swordplay, 2 things Nesta loves and always has loved are music and dancing. Homegirl's actually incredibly artistic at heart. She's a reader, she's a dancer, she's a music listener. During the next training session, Cassian, who has all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, asks Nesta, well, if you had your own sword, what would you call it? And she's not buying it for a minute and demands an explanation. You know, she refuses to answer. She's like, I don't know. Why do you care? So after practice, Cassian tells Nesta that she has received the 3 blades she made from the blacksmith. And he tells her that now these items are all magical. When he talks about, we figured this out, we've realized that you can make things, Nesta says, well, who the hell is we? And finds out that the inner circle have been having these discussions and making these decisions about her, and that Cassian has been a part of that. She is honestly really, really angry and asks him, well, who didn't want to tell me? And Cassian won't lie to her. He's like, well, Amren and Rhys. And Nesta is so angry. She marches off and heads down the stairs. And really, what she's upset about is the fact that Amren has just completely turned her back on her, doesn't trust her, doesn't want her to have any autonomy or any decision about her life. Like this argument they must have had during the summer, like it would have been really bad for things to have gotten this sour. So Nesta storms all the way down the 10,000 steps. This is what she needed. She gets to the bottom and is allowed in Valaris. This is a particularly rough scene because Nesta marches straight to Amren's room in her apartment and has a massive go at her about it. And Amren admits she still doesn't think Nesta should have those made items. A second later, Feyre appears, obviously aware that Nesta is storming through the city. While they're in this room, and Nesta's just calling out the hypocrisy of someone like Amren and Feyre being able to make decisions about what she can and can't have, what she should and shouldn't know, turns around to Feyre and says very much in anger, well, they're doing the exact same thing to you. They haven't told you that baby's probably going to kill you. And obviously, it is a real oh moment. And Feyre's horrified. Amren's horrified that now Feyre knows. But I do sit back there going, if I knew that people were keeping something from my sister that directly impacted her health, her safety, her life, I wouldn't care about what secrets people had or hadn't promised to tell each other because my priority would be the health and safety of my sibling. And of course, I would let my sister know. And though she shouldn't do it in this kind of angry manner, it's all wrapped up in the unfairness and the hypocrisy of the inner court from where Nesta is stood on the outside. And she can see that not only do they do that to other people, they do it to themselves. They do it to each other. So while I agree Nesta 100% should have told Feyre about the danger she is in with this pregnancy, the way it happens and the way it comes out is unnecessarily emotional and angry. And it's done for the wrong reason, even though I think it is the right thing to do. Rhys is so angry that Nesta has shared the fact that Rhys is lying to Feyre, that he tells Cassian if she stays in the city, he'll kill her. Yeah, real nice, isn't it? And this is where we enter the bit of this book that is incredibly tough to read. And I think anyone who reads this book and still at the end is going, I don't like Nesta. I think she's rubbish. I think she's nasty. Really misses what these next few chapters are about because Cassian takes Nesta up into the mountains and basically forces her to go on this hike with him. And he's obviously angry with her and won't speak to her, even knowing that Feyre has sent Cass a message saying, look, I'm not mad. I am upset that none of you told me this, and I'm upset about the way it came out, but I'm not angry. So Feyre, who is the injured party in all this, isn't upset and wound up. But Cassian's really angry that Nesta's betrayed his trust because he told her a secret he shouldn't have told her and she used it as a weapon. So they are walking and hiking, and Cassian is in front of her and he does not look back. And that breaks my heart because pretty much at this point, Cassian and maybe Azriel, they're the only two members of the inner circle that really have anything to do with Nesta. And she's been getting closer with Cassian. They obviously have this physical relationship with each other. And when push comes to shove, Nesta quite literally has no one on her side. And we see how bad things are internally for Nesta during this next chapter in a bit because she is hiking and there is nothing. She is empty. And the two of them don't say a single word for the next 2 days. They just walk, and Cassian forgets that Nesta needs to do things like drink. And so when she collapses, he is angry at her for not drinking or taking care of herself. And she doesn't even have any fire in her to argue with him or fight with him. She literally collapses, and his only response is anger at her. And they get to this like beautiful, beautiful lake to camp. And what we see is Nesta just kind of completely break down. And we see how much hatred and anger, not for anyone else, but also for herself, sits inside Nesta. What you've got to appreciate and know is that Nesta, as a young woman, was told her value was incredibly clear. It was prescribed to her, and she was taught and trained and physically and mentally abused by her mother and grandmother for a singular purpose. Told her entire life was about how good a man she could marry. That's all she had to focus on. And she was taught extremely well how to do this. By all means, prior to the collapse of the Archeron's fortune, Nesta was on track to marry incredibly well. She was successful and single-minded in her determination to do right by her family and get herself an incredibly affluent, successful, rich, wealthy, and noble husband. To then have all of that potential ripped away by something completely out of her control, by her father mismanaging his business. At which point, Nesta loses all forms of self worth. She loses her mother, who has very much been like this with Nesta. She is controlling, she is vicious, she is manipulative, and she carves Nesta into the vicious, cold, cunning woman she is. And Nesta is so full of anger because it's so unfair to have done everything she has been told in her life up until that point. She's done everything that's asked of her. And because her father messes up and loses all of his ships, she is now quite literally worthless in her eyes. And so her relationship with Papa Archeron, you see presented very differently from Nesta's POV to Feyre's earlier, because Nesta is full of not necessarily justified, but in her mind, justified anger at her father. And so she is sat there waiting for him to do what he needs to keep them alive. The reason Nesta doesn't go out and hunt is because in her mind, it's her father's job. He has done this to them. He is meant to look after his three girls. And the fact that Feyre steps up to the plate and goes out and starts hunting and providing for their family actually angers Nesta because it's their dad that should be doing that. It is unfair for Feyre to be going out of necessity. Their dad is so useless. He doesn't love them enough to step up. And so you see totally from Nesta's POV in this scene that for years and years she has been building up this anger and this resentment at the fact that her dad never came through for them. And then when things got really dire, didn't do everything he could to provide for his daughters. Where we've seen Feyre say little tiny things before about how she's starving and hungry, but Nesta has, nice shiny boots. We see in this book Nesta remembering things like having no soles on her boots, but shining up the top, so that from outside perspectives, they look nice and neat, but the actuality, the underside, the bit that matters, the soul, it's completely worn through. And it's a very good metaphor for Nesta herself. She keeps everyone at a distance, not because she doesn't care, but because she cares so much. And she struggles to articulate that to anybody, including her sisters. And Cassian, who she is supposedly growing very close to, still doesn't, I think, see the actuality that Nesta is a woman who, instead of caring too little, cares way too much about everything and everyone around her. She cares about how she is perceived, and she would rather appear nasty and cold and aloof than as the emotional, caring, vulnerable woman she actually is. And this outburst with Feyre to her is a loss of control. She is embarrassed and she is heartbroken because after this outburst, she is confronted by the fact that quite literally no one cares about her. It's reiterated to her again now that Elaine is very team Thaira. She literally has no support network to lean on. She has no family on her side. She has no friends within the inner circle on her side. Literally, if she did not have these budding friendships with Emery and Gwen, you could hand on heart say she had nothing. They've taken everything from her. And she hates what she's done to her sister. She hates that she said what she said in the way that she said it. And she is just this constantly self-flagellating, self-hating character. She is so oldest daughter who constantly sees herself failing against all of the expectations put on her and that she is taught from day dot. It's really hard to read. And you see here that whilst we've gotten the impression through these books that Nesta is rising above, she is okay. Very much so in Wings and Ruin, when Elaine is a mess and Nesta is feeding her. Nesta is the one scrying. Nesta's going to help them try and fix the wall. That she is okay and moving forward. And we find out here she's in such a bad state and no one sees and no one seems to care that she has been violated and just stripped back, and that no one likes her. No one likes her and no one loves her. And we're at the point after the way she's just behaved where she doesn't even like herself. She very much hates herself. And so, what we actually see depicted there on the beach is someone who genuinely wants to die, who does not want to go on living if this is what life is like. And she is so low that I think anyone who reads these books the way they're intended to read them comes to the realization that everyone has done Nesta a real disservice. That the characters we've loved up until this point, their love is in fact conditional on the people around them behaving a certain way and doing what they want for them. And I just feel so much for Nesta. She is such a strong and vibrant character, and the others treat her appallingly. And at this moment, when you see someone who actually just wants to die, sees no reason for continuing to live, it is heartbreaking. Like, I'm welling up talking about it. And what upsets me is that you see in these chapters, Cassian's just walking in front of her. Cassian is one of those other people, and it's why I far prefer the Rhys Feyre romance story than Cassian and Nesta's, because I really struggle to reconcile the way Cassian treats Nesta with, yeah, OTP kind of energy, because I do kind of find the treatment of Nesta unforgivable. Really, really, I do. But when Cassian sees Nesta actually cry, and he realizes, and she articulates that she just doesn't want to be here. She's not worth it. No one cares about her. He realizes somewhat that that's a sentiment he's never really expressed to her. He might have thought that he thinks that she is strong and brave and wonderful, but he's never told her that, and realizes no one else ever has. So he tells her that she is worthy of love and care, and she's breaking down in front of him, and it's awful. And as they're there, he's trying to make her feel better. He tells her the story of his mother, who he loved an awful lot, and about her death and what that kind of loss meant to him and how that impacted him. And they end up practicing sword fighting out there at the little camp, and Nesta executes her moves perfectly. She is becoming an incredibly good fighter. And it is at this point we move on to the third section of the book, which is called Valkyrie. Although I will admit, from like a personal emotional perspective, I never move on from this part of the book. At this low point, I stay there. Dust collecting on the pinstripe chair. Because I'm right where you left me. Sarah J Maas. Low Point was really rough for me to read.